Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying? Welcome to episode 94 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast, joined as always by Mary, a woman who spends her mornings riding the tea and spends her evenings drinking IPAs. I am only a rusty, fizzled third rail named Darren.
my
Hey, Mary, how are you?
Yeah, it's jeez. I do ride the T 3 days a week. Officially a commuter into
Indeed.
Boston.
You do.
Yep.
You do.
Red
So
red
that-
line and green line. Heath Street train.
Well, you're a city girl now. You are absolutely. So what's going on? What's happening?
Well, it's good to be back recording again. It's been a couple weeks since we last recorded, and our last episode I thought went really, really well. Order 191 was a lot of fun to record.
Mm-hmm.
And this week we are back talking about a person from the Civil War, which is pretty cool. So how have things been going for you?
Well, you could not have been better. Nothing but soft serve and sunshine over here, Mary, as always. So I must ask, since I am a gracious host today, what are you drinking tonight?
I excuse me. Fuck.
Wow. What are you coughing up tonight?
I am drinking Elysian Night Owl Pumpkin Ale by Elysian Brewing. It's pretty good. It's I think it's like a pumpkin IPA, which is right up my alley, and I'm drinking it out of the North Undefeated Civil War Champions mug.
Okay, very cool, very cool.
How about you?
Since you did ask. Well, thank you very much for asking. I really appreciate it, Mary. I'm drinking Elysian Great Pumpkin, very same beer company, different beer. I'm drinking it out of our friends, the National Civil War Museum coffee mug here, which is really, really good because that's what I'm drinking out of. So as you mentioned, Mary, as you know, there is a chill in the air, and we are officially in spooky season. That's a stupid phrase people say.
Yep.
And soon that ghosts and goblins are going to be descending on us. So tonight we're going to talk about another ghost. This is a gray one who tormented the Union Army for about 2 years in Northern Virginia. Of course, we are talking about John Singleton Mosby, Mary.
And this has been an episode we've been wanting to do it for a few months now. We talked about it back when we were I think as far back as like May, I think we started talking about it. And then we were like, okay, we'll do John Hunt Morgan first. And then you kept teasing me leading up to that, saying I was going to definitely call him Mosby. Well, now I'm afraid I'm going to say Morgan instead of Mosby in this episode because you gave me a complex.
That's probably least your problems. But we're going to talk about this a lot tonight. Obviously, he's the subject of tonight's episode here. Yep. So Mosby's exploits as a partisan ranger are legendary. He became such a cult of personality that many in the North wondered if he even existed, if he was just a fig Newton of your imagination because he was that good. Mosby was called many things. He was called a land pirate. He was called a horse thief. And his personal favorite, he was called a guerrilla. His exploits, tortured the North in that area of Northern Virginia. And he was even accused by Union Secretary of War Edwin Stanton of having something to do with the Lincoln assassination. So they pinned everything on him. Yeah. That's how much of a fearsome figure he was. As reviled and feared as he was in the North for Southern sympathizers in that area he operated, John Mosby was a hero. Yep. He really, really was. So let's jump in and see what this guy's all about, Mary. I think a lot of people like John Mosby. I think people North and South because of what he was. He has an interesting life. John Singleton Mosby was born on December 6th of 1833 at the home of his grandfather, James McLaurin, in Powhatan County, Virginia. He was a Revolutionary War vet, the grandfather, not John.
I was just going to say.
And John always said he remembered his grandfather his whole life because of that distinctive cough he got from smallpox during the Revolution. So it's always funny what you remember. He was raised at the family farm in a place called Albemarle and was owned by his father, Alfred, near Charlottesville, Virginia, which is just a few miles away from Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, Mary. I don't know if you've heard of Thomas Jefferson. Yes. He was a president here one time. And it was a home that was included slaves. His father was a slave owner. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that. As a schoolboy, John was educated at a private school in nearby Fry Woods. It was owned by a widow where John and his sister Victoria learned how to read.
Yep, he learned John's to read at the age of 7.
7 years old. And John's mother, Virginia, he always sent a small black boy with John to and from school as his companion. And Mosby, his first memory about the institution of slavery came when he was with that black boy as John's playmate. They made him pretend to be a slave and they actually had a fake slave auction
Yeah.
with some schoolmates of his. And John talks in his memoirs about how it traumatized him because someone outbid him, and he thought he lost his friends. And and that was kind of the way it was for him. As a kid, John was small. He was really tiny, and he never thought he even lived to adulthood.
Yeah, he was
To be
told
honest
like
with
I
you.
think his parents were told like he's not gonna live to adulthood, and also because he was like smaller than the other kids, like especially the boys, like he was bullied from a very young age at school, and that's gonna get him into some trouble later on in life as we'll talk about. But he learned to fight back at an early age too, and whether that's like this confidence he had or whatever, but he just like he clearly was like whatever, he just fought back. Yeah.
No, he didn't. I mean, while at school, Mosby read. He read a lot in
Hmm.
school. One of his favorite books was a book called The Life of Francis Morton, which was about a guerrilla in the Revolutionary War who often outwitted his British pursuers, which is kind of a foreshadowing of what his life was going to become. Was one of his favorite books. Mosby eventually would attend the University of Virginia, and
Hmm.
just like you, he'd a graduate degree in mathematics from school and Greek as well. But at UVA, Mosby, he was a good student, but he'd also, like you said, found himself getting
Yep.
into a little bit of trouble. He was said to be a quote given to lawless hilarity, which I've heard too, which is another situation. That incident that you kind of hinted at stands out, where Mosby actually was accused of shooting a fellow student and found himself in
Yep.
jail.
George R.
Um,
Turpin, who was a notorious bully at the school anyway, and Mosby shoots him in the neck. He ends up getting arrested, sentenced to 1 year in jail, $500 fine, and he gets expelled from the school.
Turpin said he was going to eat Mosby's blood raw. That's what set him
Oh my
off.
god! It was in
Don't say
like
that.
some
Don't.
debating thing, wasn't it? Like he was part of
Who
a
the,
debating society, and like the guy said something to Mosby, and Mosby was like, "Fuck you," and
well,
took
he
off from
had he had
there.
a small pepper pot pistol and
Yeah.
he pulled it out and shot Turpin right in the throat, which must not have
Oh.
felt good at all. After the trial, the prosecutor was a guy named William Robertson. He took a shine to Mosby, and they had a lifelong friendship. John and this
Hmm.
prosecutor, and this prosecutor gave Mosby his introduction to law. So this is how he got into law. John opened a law office in October of 1855 in the town of Bristol, Virginia.
Hmm.
Well, one day in court in the town of Abington, and this is 1860 now, he's going to meet a guy named William Blackford, and he mentioned to Mosby that hey, I'm forming this cavalry company. You want to join? And there was rumblings of secession going on. Everybody in the South um, was talking about it. So Mosby decided, you know what, hell with it, I'll join. Sounds like fun. Mosby had zero military background. He took his first ever horse riding lesson at this point in the town of Abington. It's
Yep.
amazing to think that a guy who's going to be such an important cavalier didn't ride a horse, at least trained to do it until 1860.
Yeah.
So he picked it up, as they say.
That's actually pretty remarkable. That he
Tell
did
him,
that.
yeah, I mean, you've been driving for 20 years. You still can't drive. So just think about how
Fucker.
it must be for a horse. Okay. But in that presidential election of 1860, Mosby firmly supported Stephen Douglas.
Hmm.
He was not in favor of secession,
No.
to be honest. But many of the citizens around Abington went to hear a bunch of speeches by an Alabama named William Yancey. And Yancey basically did his best to educate the Virginians on the benefits of secession. He
Yeah,
was a
and
he was a
Yancey
guy.
Yancey had been like a follower of John C. Calhoun, right? And that's
Right.
and
There was
yeah.
part. There was that tree. Well, as you know, Mary, I don't know if you know this, but there was a lawyer named Abraham Lincoln
Mm.
with a hat who ultimately won the election. He was a Republican, and he's going to win. And it's going to lead to South Carolina is going to secede, followed by some other states. It'll, of course, lead to the firing of Fort Sumter on April 12th, 1861. Mosby was sitting in court in Abington when the telegraph came in that Lincoln had called up 75,000 volunteers put down the rebellion in South Carolina, which of course led to Virginia to put him into a frenzy to
Yep.
secede at this point. Despite Lincoln's urging that the troop call up was similar to George Washington sending troops to Pennsylvania to put down the Whiskey Rebellion, Virginians were convinced he wanted to end slavery. That's kind of where it all went. Now, up to that point, Virginia, for the most part, opposed secession. Fun fact, by the way, one of the most ardent supporters of staying in the Union at the state convention of Virginia was guess who? Jubal Early,
Yep.
right? And by the end of May, Virginia is going to ultimately secede, and they're going to immediately send troops to take the armory at Harper's Ferry and that Norfolk Navy Yard. So, despite the opposition to secession, Mosby cast his lot with them and decided to go along with them, and that's what he's going to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and he ends up joining the Confederate Army as a private, serves with the Virginia Volunteers. He's actually serving under Grumble Jones to begin, which I found really
Well,
interesting. And Grumble Jones is leading the Washington Mounted Rifles. So the first battle that Mosby is going to be involved in is first Bull Run.
right, right.
Yeah,
But let's get there first.
yeah,
You know, but the thing about him was interesting though because he had to deal with that camp life,
yeah,
right? And the one thing about Mosby is he hated being in camp,
mm-hmm,
but he loved being on the picket line.
yeah,
That was his jam. He wanted to be in the picket line. In the first year, okay, during his whole training there, he only missed picket duty once when a horse fell on him when he tripped and
oh
fell over a cow or some damn thing on the road, and
God,
that's how he got hurt. His camp was shared by infantry as well as so on May 30th, Mosby and his company are going to leave. Are going to finally leave camp to join the army. Now he's going to leave his wife of 3 years,
yeah,
Pauline, as well as two children behind. Something he had a very difficult time doing. If you read Mosby's memoirs, he writes to his wife all the time.
yeah,
There's so many letters
mm-hmm,
about it. You know, to your point, Mosby's going to join that 1st Virginia Cavalry. It's going to be commanded ultimately by Jones, but also by a colonel by the name of Jeb Stuart.
yeah,
And soon Mosby found himself with a carbine and a saber, of all
yeah,
things. Now, Mosby loved the carbine, but he had no use for the saber. Never did.
no,
He says in his memoirs, the only real use of a saber was to hold a piece of meat over a fire. I dragged one through the first year of the war, but when I became commander, I discarded it. It was also under Stewart's command that Mosby really became enamored with Jeb Stuart.
yeah,
I mean, he had a man crush to say the least on
oh
Jeb.
yeah,
He loved the way he handled himself. He loved how flamboyant he was. He was impressed with his leadership ability. He said he never had an equal in such service.
no,
Now it's gonna be important. He doesn't know Jeb. He just knows who he is. He's the boss. So leading to your point there, the First Virginia is gonna be in that Shenandoah Valley until July 18th, when they're going to be sent to Manassas, Virginia, to participate in what is going to be called the Battle of First Manassas, or Battle of First Run,
mm,
if you're
yeah,
nasty, right?
mm,
And that's where it gets interesting for him, because to your point there, he sees battle for the first time.
yeah, yeah, he does, and it's after this that Jeb really gets the his attention on Mosby because Mosby turns out to be quite good at intelligence gathering.
He does. I mean, on the morning of the battle, Mosby's going to be the first guy selected to ride at the head of the
Yeah,
squadron, and he was given a Colt pistol. And this is a gun he's going to become his favorite throughout the war, is his Colt pistol. Their job, for the most part, at Manassas was to do reconnaissance, but they couldn't find any Union troops, despite being relatively close to them. And they were near that Ball's Ford. On July 2nd, the day after the battle,
mm-hmm,
Mosby's going to write to Pauline. He's going to call it a great battle and how they withstood 2 hours of Union shelling and took no losses. So they were kind of there, but they were just kind of participating.
yeah,
And and what's going to happen at this point is, after the battle, Stewart's regiment, including Mosby, is going to move to Fairfax Courthouse. We'll talk about that later on, where he and his fellow soldiers enjoyed talking about their victory and how much they enjoyed all the food the Yankees
yeah,
left for them to eat. They were living the life in camp at
yep,
this point, full of all these Union supplies. And that's pretty much where they hung out until the spring of 1862. Mosby was back on picket duty again on the Potomac, which he very much
yep,
enjoyed. Um, Around then, he began to picket so close enough to Washington. He said he could hear the Union Army's morning drum beats
yep,
in Georgetown. So he's close and he knows the area.
yeah, yeah. He knows the area very well. It's also, we should mention at this time, that's also at this time that the Confederate Congress passes the Partisan Ranger Act, which is going to definitely come into play heavily for Mosby. But what this did is it provides that such partisan rangers, after being regularly received into service, shall be entitled to the same pay, rations, and quarters during their term of service, and be subject to the same regulations as other soldiers. And they could also keep a lot of what they captured as well, I think. And this Partisan Ranger Act is something that is going to appeal quite a lot to John Mosby.
Oh, it will. He'll certainly take a shine to that, to say the least. While he's picketing near Georgetown, there's been experiences where some Union troops approached the picket line under a flag of truce so they can hang out and share food. There
Yeah.
was situations like this that popped up. November 21st, 1861, he's going to write to tell his wife about a great adventure he participated in. He was one of 80 men who were sent out to scout. And upon hearing the enemy ahead, they were ordered to charge at them. And this was very exciting for Mosby. So he and a fellow soldier named Fount Beatty got separated from a company when they came upon two Yankees in the woods who were firing at them. Mosby said he was able to kill one of them with his carbine, and the other was killed by a South Carolinian who happened to be arriving. But he described this charge in this assault as the most dashing feat of the war up to that point, and gave him a real taste of cavalry attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So as he's going through his experience, don't forget, he has no military experience. Everything he's learning is on the fly, but he knows what he likes, and he likes this cavalry attack. So Mosby's last day on picket duty is going to be February 12th, 1862. And by then, Jeb Stuart he's been promoted to brigadier general, and so he and General Joseph Johnston, they're going to share a headquarters in Centerville, Virginia. Okay. Now, this is where you get lucky with your career. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yep.
And this is going to be probably the most important meeting that he ever has. One day, Jeb is going to ask Captain William Blackford. He's the guy who originally asked Mosby and the Corps to join the cavalry.
Mm-hmm.
So he asked Blackford to find him a man to accompany a wagon with some ladies and escort them back behind enemy lines. Not sure if Jeb's headquarters was a barn or not, but I'm not here to judge. Okay, but Jeb wants these women who were in the southern side to go back across the line to the Union to get back. Mosby gets selected to be this escort, and he performed the task valiantly and returned to Stuart's headquarters late in the evening while it's snowing really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So Mosby at this point had never met Stuart. And like I said, he had a serious man crush on him. I don't know if he had a tattoo of his signature on his arm or not, but he's serious. But he had a serious man crush on him, right? So basically, what happens is Mosby's going to beat him, and you can only imagine how that goes, But he's going to ask Jeb. He needs a pass to get back across the line again because the headquarters is kind of far away. He needed a pass. To Mosby's astonishment, Jeb looks out the window, sees the snow falling. Okay, he's going to ask Mosby to have a feety pajama sleepover and spend the night at his headquarters rather than go back in the bad weather.
Yeah.
Well, Mosby is like, "Are you kidding me?" You can only imagine how happy he was at that point.
That's like being the math nerd and the the star quarterback invites you to sleep over or something.
Oh yeah,
hang out with them.
Mosby's going to write in his memoirs, "I never dreamt of Stuart inviting me to spend the night at his headquarters, or that I shall ever rise to intimacy with him." Well, I don't know what the hell that means, but he's excited to be around with him. So Mosby finds himself sitting around the campfire with Stuart and Joseph Johnston, where he admitted to be so intimidated by them he didn't even look up from the fire. Just imagine, you're a young guy, and you're sitting there with Jeb Stuart and Joseph Johnston, the big bosses.
Yeah.
So dinner's served, and the two generals get up to go eat, and Mosby's going to stay back. Jeb's going to come back and say, "Aren't you coming to dinner? Let's go." And so now Mosby's going to be having dinner with them. And Mosby and Stuart at this point became friends. And this friendship is going to continue until the date that Stuart dies at the Yellow Tavern, right? The next day after the sleepover, Mosby's going to get promoted to the position of adjutant. And so it's clear that Stuart took a shine to him, to this tiny private, this frail little guy. But this is how you get lucky with your career. And just by happenstance, that's the meeting. So Mosby, along with the rest of the army, they're going to begin to move again on March 1st, 1862, and they're going to start to hear noise of what U.S. Grant is doing up at Fort Donelson.
Mm-hmm.
And by now, Mosby saw the war is absolute Southern freedom, and spoke very regularly in his letters home to his wife, Pauline. So he was against secession at the beginning, and now he's all on board.
Yep.
And I think, being with Stuart and getting a taste of being some cavalry action, you can see how it's going for him.
Yeah. And just the fact that he liked, picket duty and all that, like it's clear where his career path is going with this.
So the army's gonna fall back to the Rapidan to begin that defense of Richmond against George McClellan, who was beginning his Peninsula
Yeah.
campaign. Now Mosby is going to notice a large Union force was starting to follow them as they withdrew along the railroad and began to fire on them. So that next morning, Mosby is riding along with Stuart, who had gotten to know each other really, really well at this point. So Johnson wasn't sure if that group who fired upon Mosby was McClellan's vanguard or just some scouting party. He had
Mm.
no idea. So Stuart kind of sheepishly asked Mosby, I can't make you do this, but if you want, do you want to take a ride and go see who these people
And
are?
Mosby's like, okay.
He's like, yes, sir.
Yeah.
So basically, he just didn't like to order. Mosby, of course, is going to yup it all day.
Yeah.
He's going to ride to the rear of that Union column. He's going to notice that they were alone, that there was no communication to Washington set up, and that group was just a diversion. So, armed with this info, Mosby's going to gleefully report back his findings to Stuart, and he almost got shot by rebel pickets coming
Yeah.
back. It's another story. He's going to go find Stuart, who happens to be with General Richard Ewell at this point, whose division was with them. And when he did, he passed on the news. Now, Stuart, of course, was thrilled at what Mosby discovered. So, thanks to this info, Stuart is going to send his full regiment now out to bag these guys. And the result was the capture of 30 Union
Yeah.
prisoners and 16 horses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Stuart is going to write to General Johnson at this point, recommending Mosby give this guy a promotion.
Yeah.
Because this whatever this it is, this guy's got it.
Mm-hmm.
McClellan's Peninsula campaign was in full swing, and after Johnson's wounding at 8 Pines, as we like to call it, 7 Pines,
Also,
on
where
June
Oliver
1st,
Howard lost his arm.
there you
There's
go.
my
There's your Howard
reference.
reference. How are you going to get him in somehow? So after that, on June 1st, as we know, the command of that Confederate army is going to fall to Robert E. Lee, who at this point had never heard of John Mosby.
No.
He never had. Mosby talks about the panic in that Confederate camps at this point. Johnson had been wounded. They didn't know what the Union's intentions were. They had this new commander that they all called Old Granny. Granny Lee. They had no idea who he was. So you can see how this was going now. Now, after McClellan's going to fall back, Stuart wants to find out if that Union general was fortifying along the creek called the Topotomy, which basically emptied into a river called the Pamunkey.
Yeah.
Great names, by the way.
Pamunkey.
So Jeb is going to put a small party together again, just Mosby and just 3 other guys to ride towards McClellan's lines. Now, what they're going to discover is this, that about several miles along the Union right flank only had cavalry pickets to guard their lines of communications with their supply headquarters at White House Landing on the river, right? Moses is going to return to report his findings again to Stuart, who quickly rode off to see General Lee. When he returns, Jeb tells his cavalry to roll them the cars up. We're going. And there's some great stories with this because Lee had basically okayed that operation on June 11th. So on the 12th, Stuart, along with 12,000 troopers and 2 guns, are going to begin to move based on the intel that Mosby provided them.
Yeah.
And when an aide asked Stuart when he'd be back, Jeb actually thanked him. He goes, "It may be years, it may be forever," quoting the lyrics of that song Kathleen Mulvaney.
Yeah.
He sang to the aide.
That's so cool.
And he jumped on his horse and rode off. But Stuart's men are going to begin this adventure, what is going to later be known as Stuart's ride around McClellan.
Yeah.
And when they returned 3 days later, they'd covered 100 miles. They rode around 100,000 men. They were hailed as absolute heroes. They had 165 prisoners, 260 horses, a whole bunch of DQ gift cards, destroyed a bunch of railroad tracks. They cut the communication lines, and they bagged several Union wagons.
And McClellan looks like a complete, it's blunder in the northern newspapers for him with this, McClellan rides all the way around him. And it's included in the song Giant the Cavalry.
Yeah, McClellan looks silly. He falls back and the whole deal. At this point, Robert E. Lee is going to get to know the name John Mosby.
Yeah.
And because Jeb is going to continue to petition him for promotion. Everything John Mosby touches turns to gold right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Mosby had a real knack for reconnaissance and sneaking behind enemy lines and wanting to do more, right? After McClellan's Peninsula campaign failed, he was sent to the corner McClellan was,
Yep.
F off, right? And John Pope's Army of Virginia offered a huge target for him at this point because they were the next ones on the dance floor.
Yep.
Pope, as famously as you know, declared, what did he declare?
He said, "In the West, we see the backs of our enemies."
We see the back of our enemies. He also said, and we look only to his front to let the rear take care of itself. The rest of his hot air is really interesting to Mosby, though, because Mosby says, basically Pope says, let us study the probable lines of retreat of our opponents and leave our own to take care of themselves. Let us look before us and not behind. And Mosby, he's reading this and he saw a chance to do what he always wanted to really, really want to
Yep.
do. And this is act as a partisan. Because Pope's attitude of looking forward, not looking back, was begging for it.
Yep. He's
Now,
asking for it in the savannah.
oh, he certainly is, and he doesn't care. He's just begging for it. So, by definition, a partisan is a member of an irregular military force consisting of members resisting a foreign occupation.
Yeah.
Basically, they're just there's raiders is
Yeah.
what they do, right?
Yeah, it's like guerrilla warfare. They're raiders, but
Yeah.
like we talked about a few minutes ago, in April of 1862, the Confederate Congress has made this kind of thing legal, that these guys are going to
Mhm.
get paid the same, they're going to have the same regulations. But as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, some of them found it to be a little bit of a better life than being a soldier.
Absolutely was. Pope's words dared the rebels to do it. He was basically asking for it. And Mosby was quick to offer his services, so he approached Stuart for permission to put a small group together, no more than a dozen or so, and to do what Pope didn't want to do for himself, which is take care of his rear.
Yep.
What Mosby wanted to do. So Mosby hoped an attack on the rear and supplies would force Pope to use his cavalry to guard the lines of communication. So he's figuring by destroying them, Mosby's going to cause some confusion and weaken the overall strength of the army.
Yep.
That was first foray to be a partisan failed miserably, and this is the first time he really falls on his junk. Okay, he was quickly captured by a New York cavalry called the Harris Cavalry.
Yep.
And Mosby found himself at the old Capitol Prison in Washington.
Yep.
But he would be quickly exchanged later and was
Yep,
off
10
on a
days
boat
later.
to Fort Monroe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, normally, okay, you have a little bit of egg on your face, but Mosby saw an opportunity here.
Oh, he
and he
did.
took it.
Yep.
So while he's sitting in jail, Mosby is still scouting, and he spent 4 days at Hampton Roads, where he began to notice a bunch of transport ships
Yep.
waiting.
Just an unusual number of them were starting to build up.
And he found out the boats belonged to our old friend General Ambrose Burnside. Yep. Good mass guy, probably a Patriots fan.
Yeah.
The question was whether these boats, they were obviously troop ships, were they going to be supporting McClellan on the peninsula, meaning he was going to be going back to get Richmond again, or were they going to support Pope and go that way? So Mosby ends up learning through a Confederate spy that these boats were actually meant for Pope. And now Mosby knew for sure that Mac was definitely exiting the peninsula. That was it. They were not going back because at the time they had no idea. Bottom line is Richmond's no longer in jeopardy.
No,
based on this. So Mosby he's gonna get paroled. He's gonna go back, and as soon as he gets back, he's gonna basically walk 12 miles in the August heat to get there, and it's just a miserable. But he goes straight for Robert E. Lee.
Yeah,
and Mosby had not met Lee before. Mosby's going to get to Lee's headquarters just to introduce himself. He proceeds to tell him what he learned about these transport ships. Removing the words of an actor? I don't know if he said that, but probably not. But Lee is going to quickly telegraph Stonewall Jackson, which allowed him to basically attack Pope at Cedar Mountain before Burnside's those reinforcements could get there. So Mosby's intel allowed Jackson to go ahead and hit Burnside. It hit Cedar Mountain. The funny story about this is Mosby, on his walk, he found a whole bunch of lemons for some reason.
Yep.
And he put them in a bag. And he walked up, and after he met Lee, he put all the lemons on the thing and said, "Here you go, General." And Lee just stared at him and said something along the lines of, "Why don't you give these to the sick men instead?" And just shook his head or something like that. And so he's like, "Ooh, okay." But that was his first meeting.
Oh my
with
God.
Lee. So you can only imagine.
Somebody must have got mixed up with like who likes lemons and.
Well, that's what was
So
funny was
yeah,
because Jackson had just missed the boat. He just went over.
yeah,
She missed out some lemons. But so Mosby's going to go to is going to he's going to go along to the town of Hanover to meet up with Stewart again, who was planning to meet Fitzlee at the town of Verdeersville, where Stewart's going to be surprised by Union cavalry, including John Buford, and famously lose his hat. We talked about it in the
yeah,
episode last week.
yeah.
And a few days later, Stewart's going to ride around Pope's army at Catlett Station, and when he galloped by, Stewart's going to say to Mosby, "Come along with me. I'm going to get my hat." That's what he said.
That's awesome.
And, which he did well, and he found some plans which led
Yeah,
to the unraveling of Pope at Second
yeah,
Manassas. So now after that battle, which was a slam dunk Confederate victory, Mosby is going to be charged of taking 9 men down to Manassas to reconnoiter the area.
yeah,
And when he comes across a Yankee regiment, they're going to charge at him and they're going to stampede right through the entire regiment. And what's funny about this is if you read Mosby's memoirs, he's got a little bit of an attitude in him.
yeah.
That raid was successful, but the newspaper in Richmond credited it to Thomas Rosser and not Mosby.
Yeah.
And he was pissed off, and he wrote back something along the lines of Rosser was not within 25 miles of Manassas. So he liked it. But with this, Stewart's going to at this point is going to give Mosby back his job as a partisan. He'd been caught, now he's back, and this is going to be John Mosby's primary role for the rest of the war. And this is really where the legend of John Mosby really begins.
Yeah.
So you look at his experiences so far, every step along the way he's learning, he's picking up experiences, what he did right, what he didn't do right.
And you think of the major things that he's been involved with that, might not have happened without him, or that he had, a role in, like the ride around McClellan, seeing the stuff at Hampton Roads, like all this stuff that he's kind of had his hands in, some pretty significant, things in the early part of the Civil War.
Absolutely. But every experience he had led him to this point. Thanks to that fortuitous meeting in the snow with Jeb Stuart, which really kicked the whole thing off just by happenstance.
And the feety pajama sleepover.
The feety pajamas. But Mosby's Raiders were born. So by January of 1863, when he had a band of 15 men, they're going to cross the Rappahannock to begin operations in the area where Joseph Johnston had abandoned the previous year. What's interesting about this, too, Mosby never forgave Joseph Johnston at the beginning of the war for giving up Harper's Ferry so quickly.
No.
So he always had a skewed attitude towards Joseph Johnston. If you read that, he goes on and on about that. Mosby saw his job as threatening and harassing the enemy on the border near Washington and forcing him to withdraw his troops from the area, meaning the Union. Yeah. A rebel newspaper described John Mosby as slight, muscular, supple, and vigorous, they said. His eye is keen, penetrating, and ever on the alert.
But not
it's like
manly.
Daniel Steele wrote that newspaper.
Yeah, but not manly, like another
not manly. No, God. But Mosby, he was the kind of guy too. Like everybody knows one. He just never sat still. He was always bouncing around. He was always moving. He was clean shaven. He said he was always smiling. That was the other thing too. Yeah. He always had a smile on his face. In Northern Virginia, Mosby got intelligence from behind Union lines from people he met spending that time on picket duty. So while he was there, he got to meet a lot of people. Now, the Union Army that was attached to the defense of Washington south of the Potomac, they had set up their winter quarters throughout Fairfax County, Virginia, right? And the commander of this force was a guy named General Edwin Stoughton. Now, we'll talk about him. He was a Vermonter. He was more famous after the war for defending Robert Cobb Kennedy. He was a Confederate operative who got caught trying to burn New York City down in November of 1864. Kennedy, by the way, was the last Confederate soldier ever executed by the Union men in 1865. So that's not for nothing, but that's the history of that. Stoughton's headquarters is in Fairfax Courthouse. The cavalry commander in this area was Colonel Percy Wyndham, and his job was to guard basically outposts in the area. Now, in this area is where Mosby began his partisan operations, and he spent considerable time seeking out weak spots in the Union line, just probing and testing the lines. Fairfax County at the time was a mix of Union loyalists as well as Southern sympathizers, and everyone knew who each other was. Everyone knew this guy liked the North, this guy liked the South. But Mosby knew who his friends were and knew where to go. Just before Mosby got the okay to begin his guerrilla attacks on the Union in the area, a woman named Laura Radcliffe, who lived in nearby
Hmm.
Herndon, had helped nurse Jeb Stuart after he was injured at the Battle of Drainsville in late 1861. But they knew who these people were, where to go. Jeb was mesmerized by her, by the way, this Radcliffe, and she became part of the rebel spy network. So when Mosby began his operations, her home was a regular stop for Mosby for food and for rest
Yep.
and things like that. And that was kind of the key for Mosby. The network of Southern sympathizers offered Mosby's guys really a place to
Yep.
stay. And by doing that, they didn't need to camp.
Yep.
And that was huge. The benefit, of course, is very hard to find them if you're the Union,
Yep.
if they're not in
Exactly.
camp. They're all spread out there. They're hidden,
Yep.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the benefits to being in this partisan to the Rangers is you're hidden. You've got to
Yeah,
stay up to,
absolutely.
yep.
So what about these partisans? We're getting ready.
So what
Tell us about these partisan people.
so they're the 43rd, or they will become the 43rd Virginia Cavalry, also known as Mosby's Rangers. Mosby already had a reputation by this point, so like his numbers like increased pretty quickly, and he had a reputation already too. Not a great one with the Union, but they were scared of him. So some of the recruits were very young as 14 years of age. But there was some older recruits as well. Most of them are from Virginia, but at one time he had a Prussian with him, an Irishman, an Englishman, and also Marylanders. He had combat veterans with him. He had like guys that had never fought before. Like you think about the 14, 15-year-old kids that are joining him. Some Confederate officers even resigned their commissions to be part of Mosby's Rangers, which gave him not a great reputation in the Army in Northern Virginia too. Like there were some that did not agree with what he was doing and saying like, well, he's taking things away from us, from men that don't actually, want to be soldiers. Many of them are exceptional horsemen. They're described as being deadly with a pistol. And a lot of them are from well-off families, and post-Civil War, a lot of them go on to become lawyers and doctors and like have really great careers as well. So there's some good stories there. But this, how quickly he was able to grow his numbers shows Mosby's popularity at the time and this reputation. He comes from being this lawyer who has no training as a soldier, never been on a horse until like 1860. And here he is able to bring all these guys in. But these are men that are also seeking adventures. And like you said, the Rangers would board in private homes when they weren't on raids. And this is an advantage. You get to sleep in a comfortable bed. You're going to be fed. And more than that, the Union guys aren't going to be able to find you because, a lot of them know enough to hide anything that would distinguish them as being one of these Rangers, right? They also had a sense of wanting to punish the Union for invading their homeland. And this is one way to do it. They can take stuff, right? At the most, Mosby's going to have around 2,000 men. That's at the very most. That's at the top of, the Rangers. And they are going to be with him they go from 1863 right through to the end of the war, even for a few weeks after that. But this is something that is different than being a soldier. And, you're still getting paid. You're still getting the same rations, like if you're out on your raids. But when you come back from those raids, you don't have to sleep in a tent. You get to sleep in a comfortable bed most of the time.
Right. And like you said, a lot of people just wanted to jump onto it. Mosby's first attacks at this period, like I said before, they targeted the weak spots on the picket lines.
Yeah.
They hit fast, they took prisoners, they got horses, and they got out quick. The men in the picket line were used to at this point, they were used to these quiet nights, these winter nights. And suddenly they had to be on alert all the time. Initially, Stoughton and Wyndham, the Union command, they blamed local farmers for the raids. And when the raids began, the feds would find the farmers at home in their beds while these attacks were being made. Because they didn't see camps and where the hell they were. They were struck by an invisible foe. And Wyndham sent a message to a citizen who knew him, say, whoever's doing the attacks is nothing more than a horse thief. Mosby's going to get the message, read and go, okay.
Yep.
He's going to respond back to Wyndham because he hates Wyndham. He writes back and he says, I don't deny being a horse thief, but all the horses I had stolen had riders on them, and the riders had sabers, carbines, and pistols.
Yeah.
That's what he says to him. So he's also going to tell Wyndham that his men really weren't worth capturing anyway, And you really should consider giving them 6 shooters, since that's all Mosby really used. His men carried 2 pistols.
Yeah.
They didn't carry sabers. They didn't carry carbines. They carried pistols. Mosby also added, "Oh, by the way, we didn't pay for our pistols. The U.S. government did."
Oh,
That's so much shade. And that's how he
wow.
was. So by February 1863, Mosby's in Fauquier County, where he says in his memoirs that he was having a gay time with the Yankees, having captured 28 Yankee cavalry and 29 horses. At this point, Mosby is operating with just 15 guys. He's in his raiding party. He's attacking units of 200 plus and
Hmm.
getting away with it every single
Yep.
time. They say if you enjoy your job, Mary, you're not really working. It's like you at
Nope.
the DQ in the summertime,
Oh
big
yeah,
smile
I
on your
love it
face.
there. Love it there.
And Mosby was loving life, to say the
Yep.
least. He was raiding unsuspecting camps, many times riding hard in the snow. And as soon as they charged, the unsuspecting Federals just turned and ran like hell,
Hmm.
leaving everything behind. Most of their horses, they'd send back the horses to the Confederate Army. Is what they would usually do. By now, Mosby, this was going on and on and on, was firmly on Washington's radar. Okay, and he was a target, had a target on his back. Major Joseph Gilmore, he's going to be in the 18th Pennsylvania, was going to be sent with 200 men to stop this gang, they called
Yep.
them, who were and basically they were referred um, to arrest every man they could. That was their plan. So they said, any guy you get, just arrest. We don't know who these people are, but if you see a guy and he's not off
Yep.
fighting, he must be one of them. Arrest him. So at first, Gilmer thought, like Wyndham did earlier,
Hmm.
that it was all these older
Yep.
farmers because they were the only guys they could find. So you know what he does? He starts pulling them out of bed and arresting these old
Yeah.
guys. You, and he does. So he grabbed dozens of elderly men and made them prisoners and made them march 25 miles to camp. Okay,
Oh
march.
my
He put them on a
God.
horse.
Yeah. Yeah.
They doubled up on a horse. They didn't march, but it must have been quite the adventure for these older guys. I mean, they don't say how old they were,
Yeah.
but it sounds like they were scared like hell. So Mosby said in his memoirs of this whole thing, just picture up this big line of horses with a rider and an old man next to it who's
Yeah.
being accused of raiding. This guy probably couldn't even, get up and
Yep.
make it to the bath, let alone a raid. But he's going to say in his memoirs, the column looked like a procession of Canterbury pilgrims. That's
Yep.
what he said. And so he gets word that they're not that far away. So he, with his men, are going to start in that direction to go free these guys
Yep.
and back this column. So Mosby's going to follow the path of that caravan was heading, and he's going to discover them about 5 miles on a hill ahead of the town of Aldie. We talk about Aldie,
Yep.
and many of Gilmore's men were dismounted at this point. So the Union men were stunned because here comes Mosby charging at them. And all of a sudden, these Union guys just turned and ran like hell in all
Yep.
directions. Major Gilmore, by the way, he wasn't there. He left earlier that night to go get banged up with some friends, so he was drinking.
Nice.
He wasn't there at this point. So troopers from the 1st Vermont Cavalry,
Hmm.
which was a camp nearby, are going to get sent to go find Gilmore's men
Yep.
because they took off. Gilmore had no idea this was coming, and he looks up, and who does he see? He sees the 1st Vermont coming at him. Who does he think they are? He thinks they're Mosby.
Yep.
So Gilmore, what does he do? He turns and takes off too. He runs like hell. So due to the melting snow, his men's horses were basically stuck in the mud.
Yep.
And the men riding the horses, you know what they started doing to lighten the weight? They started throwing the old guys off
Yep. Oh my God.
because it's slowing them down.
Yeah.
So just picture these horses trying to run in the mud and the snow, and these old guys getting pushed off the horses so these Union guys can take off. Gilmore's going to get back. He's going to be tried for cowardice and drunkenness, and he's out of the army. They can't get rid of him for that. But these raids went on over and over again, and Mosby was becoming a legend to the Southerners and a demon in the North. One of my favorite Mosby story probably involves a Yankee cavalry regiment who was in camp. So kind of you've heard this one before, Mary. But one of the men, they're sitting around a camp. He decides he's hungry. He's going to get himself some food. So he decides to go over to a nearby house, and he's going to knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. A woman answers. The trooper is going to say, is anybody else in this house? And the woman's going to say, no one but Mosby. And the guy goes, Mosby? Mosby's here? Yes, sir, Mosby's here. Well, the trooper demands You take me to Mosby at this point. So he storms up the stairs. The woman opens the door, points at her baby cradle and says, "There he is," and points to her newborn that she called Mosby.
Oh,
So she names a kid
oh
after this
my
guy who's
God.
been menacing these people, and this guy thought he bagged Mosby. So another story that's funny about Mosby, and this is that cult of personality
Yeah.
now. He talks about a time that he's riding along and he hears a guy yell, "Come here, Mosby."
Yeah.
He's like, "The hell?" So he goes over, he turns his horse, rides up to the house, and he asks the man, he says, "Yeah?" And the guy's stunned. And he goes, "You want me?" He goes, "No, I was calling my dog Mosby."
God.
and so and so that's kind of what it was. You know, Mosby had a habit of robbing from captives, mostly medicine,
Yeah.
the guys he bagged, because he knew the locals didn't have any
Yeah.
because of the blockade. So he would catch these people, he would steal their medicine, he would give them to the locals. This added to that
This
legend of
kind of
his.
Robin Hood kind of guy that
And
he's becoming.
he's operating in a bunch of counties: Fairfax, Fauquier, Prince
Yep.
William, Loudoun. That whole area is where he is. So as the weeks go on, Mosby begins to gather a ton of prisoners,
Yep.
and a lot of them were deserters at this point.
Yeah.
One man, he is a northerner from a guy from the 5th New York Cavalry. His name is Ames,
Yeah.
and he decides he wants to help Mosby,
Yeah.
and he starts giving good intelligence about troop distribution, where the gaps in the lines were, all this stuff. So at first, Mosby's like, okay, I don't think I'm falling for this one.
Yeah.
It's a trap. That's what he was probably
Yeah,
thinking.
exactly.
But the thing about it, though, he wanted to believe him really, really bad. So he decided to take Ames on a raid to Fairfax to test him out a little bit.
Yeah.
He wanted to he made sure he wasn't armed, but he took him along. In Fairfax, they discovered 100 Union men sleeping in a schoolhouse, and they all escaped except their horses. But what Mosby remembers is Ames taking a Yankee in the head with a carbine and smashing his head open.
Oh.
And at that point on, Mosby's like, "Yep, he's one of us." And so Mosby began to trust him. Mosby, he'd been doing this for a while, but he wanted to pull off his ultimate caper, and he knew now was the time.
Mm-hmm.
Up to this point, he'd been hitting weak points, he'd been taking prisoners, he'd been getting horses, but there were two big fish he really wanted to get.
Yep.
It was the cavalry's Percy Wyndham, who
Yep.
he hated, and the overall commander, Edwin Stoughton.
Yeah.
Wyndham, as it turns out, was relieved of command before he could do it.
Shocker.
But he could still get Stoughton, and he knew Stoughton was at Fairfax County Courthouse. Yep. Now, Mosby knows the area, and so he knew this was his big chance, and he wanted him bad. Okay, he wanted like the last IPA in the fridge with those eyes of yours lighting up. That's exactly you. So in the evening of March 8th, 1863, Mosby's going to take 29 guys, and they're going to meet in Dover in Loudoun County, and he's going to tell them, "Boys, I shall mount the stars tonight or sink lower than plummet ever sounded. Adventures to the adventurous," he said to them. That was what he said to these guys. Now, these guys loved Mosby at this point. Mosby was a hard bastard to work for.
Yeah.
He was demanding. He was hard, but his men loved him, and they loved the adventure of it.
So it was hard to work for him?
What?
It was hard to work for Mosby.
It was hard. Okay. But that night of March 8th was dark, and it was drizzling, freezing rain. And they had about a 25-mile ride to Fairfax Courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get about 7 miles away in Warrenton, and there are thousands of federal troops that they needed to get by. And this is really the first step they had to get by. And this is where Ames comes in. Ames, that former New York cavalry trooper, he knows exactly where the breaks and the lines are.
Yep.
So what does he do? They have to kind of go out of their way a little bit, but he leads them to them. So they're able to sneak right past all of these troops. They sneak right under their noses. Now, Mosby knew that darkness was his benefactor.
Yeah.
So he wanted to get to the courthouse by midnight so they could GTFO by sunrise, because the weather and that rerouting that Ames had to lead them through kind of delayed them by about 2 hours. So it's about 2:00 in the morning. They made it into the area, and they're going to easily sneak past the sentinels, who are either sleeping or just too dark to see them at this point, because nobody expected this. This is the last thing anybody expected. Mosby's men made a bunch of prisoners really, really quick. They bagged a bunch of guys. One of them was a guard at General Stoughton's headquarters. They also cut all the telegraph lines, by the way.
Yeah.
So Mosby now knows where the headquarters is. So Mosby had 5 or 6 guys, and he's going to arrive to the house that Stoughton is sleeping in. And he's going to knock loudly on the front door. Bang, bang, bang. Someone's going to open a window above and yell, who is it? And Mosby's going to respond, it's the 5th New York Cavalry with the dispatcher, General Stoughton. That's what he tells him. Must have hit his accent. And the door opens, and one of Stoughton's staff officers, a guy named Lieutenant Prentice, stands there. Mosby grabs him by the nightshirt really hard and whispers, "Take me to Stoughton." All I could think about is Lewis Powell going to Seward at this point. That's kind of what I imagined when it was going through. So he goes. So they brought the Rebs to Stoughton's bedroom where he was sleeping, and according to Mosby, this is where it gets great. Mosby walked up to the general sleeping in his bed, slapped him hard on the ass, and told him to get up. And Stoughton's all groggy. You can just imagine how that must have been. And he asks, "What the hell's going on?" Mosby says, "Have you ever heard of Mosby?" Stoughton responds, "Well, yes. Did we catch him?" And Mosby responds, "What? I am Mosby, and he just caught you."
I love that. I am Mosby.
What's amazing about this, though, is they were actually able to get him out undetected. Since basically they knew they had to get out by daybreak. So one man awoke to the noise. They couldn't help make some noise. His name was Colonel Johnstone. Colonel Johnstone, ironically, was the guy who replaced Percy Wyndham. So they found the guy. So Johnstone, he's going to see the situation, and you know what he does? He runs out the back door. Some say he was completely naked.
Oh my God!
When he ran out the back door.
Why are these guys sleeping naked?
Who the hell knows? But he runs out the door and hides in the garden until Mosby's men leave. They said, "The hell with this guy." But allegedly, he ran out the door totally where what the good Lord gave him, and he ran out and hid in the garden. Now, that's according to Mosby. That's what he says. But who knows? But I think it's probably true. Who knows what's going on with that?
Wow.
But Mosby's going to make it back to the lines and to their headquarters. Stoughton is going to get left with a local citizen named Beckham. I don't know if you can bend it or not, but that's what he left it with. Beckham, ironically, was the father of Stoughton's classmate at West Point. So they kind of knew each other. So he's like, "All right, well, you guys know each other. You guys can hang out." When Lincoln heard of Stoughton's capture, remember what he said?
What did he say?
He said, "I don't mind the loss of a general. I can make more, but I cannot make horses." Because he was about losing the horse. That's where this quote comes from. Stoughton's military career, by the way, done. That was it for him. He goes off later to become the lawyer and defend Kennedy, that whole thing we talked about before.
He literally got spanked by Mosby.
He did. You can just imagine that. This guy's running naked to the garden, hiding out. And it's just imagine the intrigue of this. You wonder why people love working for him. So in the South, Mosby, again, is an absolute rock star now. And Jeb is gushing over this. Because over this latest Stoughton caper, Jeb's going to write of this of the capture. He's going to write his last brilliant exploit: the capture of Brigadier General Stoughton, 2 captains, 30 other prisoners, 58 horses, justifies this recognition. This feat, unparalleled in war, was performed in the midst of the enemy troops without loss or injury. They pulled this thing off and didn't really lose anybody.
Exactly.
So Mosby's exploits are going to continue in the Valley now, where he quickly becomes the bane of Bill Sheridan's existence with that great hat. And so the legend continues to grow, and he becomes enemy number 1 in Northern Virginia at this point. Mosby was a soldier, okay, and he knew what he had to do, even if he didn't like to do it. And that's going to lead to a story that's going to come out a little bit later in the fall. Now, you mentioned before about Mosby's Raiders. They were young, and some of these were as young as 12 years old, 14 years old. They were kids, and that's partially why they couldn't be caught. And so what happens is Mosby had been a couple of weeks before, he got shot in the belt buckle, as they say.
In the junk.
A bullet ricocheted off of his belt buckle and hit him in the coin purse. He was out for a little while. And so there was an incident that happened not long after that, at a place called Front Royal, Virginia.
Yeah.
Great place to go. Bellboy's headquarters
Yep.
there, in case you're in the area. September 22nd, 1864, 6 of Mosby's men are going to get captured and executed by the feds,
Yep.
while Mosby's men were being commanded by Captain William Chapman in his absence from the junk shot there, right?
Yep.
These executions were conducted by George Armstrong Custer.
Yeah.
And 2 of the men out of the 6 were hanged
Mm-hmm.
by a tree and had a sign around them saying, "The fate of Mosby's men."
Yep.
The other 4 were shot in the back of the head, execution style. That's
Yep.
how it was.
Yeah.
One of them was a kid named Henry Rhodes. He was probably 14, maybe even a little bit younger. He was shot in front of his weeping mother, who was begging for mercy.
Yeah.
Who swore he wasn't with them, and he got shot anyway.
Yeah. There was one guy before he was executed. They said to him, we'll give you your life if you let us know where Mosby is. And the guy was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And he said, my last moments are sweetened by the reflection that for every man you murder this day, Mosby will take a tenfold revenge.
You know what Mosby does? He gets his revenge, doesn't he?
He does. Yep.
So he's going to respond pretty quickly. He's going to message Phil Sheridan that 7 of Custer's men who have been caught have been executed as retaliation.
Yep.
Needless to say, that was the end of the executions. That was it.
Yeah.
Because if Mosby started killing people because they couldn't even find him or see him, they said, you know what, the hell with this.
Yeah. Mosby also writes him too and says, can we just start treating people like the prisoners with, humanity? And then after that, any of them that were captured were treated as prisoners of war. So there was no, like you said, no more executions.
Yeah, and they were scared to death of Mosby because this is a guy if he could ride right in under our nose and get stolen, he could kill anybody he wanted to, and they knew that. So these stories, there are several of these stories. One more is another famous one called the Greenback Raid of October 1864. Now he has, for every story we tell, there's 3 or 4 that we don't. You just can't tell
There's
them all.
So many about Mosby.
But they're a favorite. So October 64 is the Greenback Raid. At this point, Mosby is destroying railroads along the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in Jefferson County in now West Virginia. It was Virginia at the time, right? So October 14th, 1864, Mosby's men tore the rails and track of the rail. What they would do is they would tear the railroad apart. The train would come, crash, and they would go loot it. That's kind of what they did. So at 2:00 in the morning, engine number 27 comes rumbling through from Baltimore and crashes, falling on its side. Now, Mosby's men at this rate are about 84 people. Now, they're going to jump on the train. They're going to start throwing civilians out because the train was on fire. One woman responds and she yells, "Mercy, mercy, my father is a mason."
The
Mosby
Mason
responds,
story. I was hoping you would tell this one.
Mosby responds back, "Well, I can't help you with that."
Yeah. And didn't he say something like, this isn't a Masonic lodge? Or something
like that.
Yeah,
So
he said that to one guy. He's like, this is not
a
Masonic lodge.
Yeah. So on the train, by happenstance, there were several German troops who didn't speak much English at all, if at all. Now, Mosby's men were yelling at them, "Get off the freaking train. Just get off the train." And they're looking at him going, "Yeah, nice. It is a nice day out. Thank you for asking." They didn't understand what the hell he was saying. And so Mosby says, "Well, if these Dutch won't come out, we'll burn them out." So the train starts burning.
Yeah.
They finally did. And what's funny is one of the Germans explained that they were there to learn the art of war. That's why they came. And he rode up to Mosby to tell him this. And he complained. He goes, "By the way, I had this great suit. One of your men stole my suit. And now he gave me his dirty clothes to wear." So he's complaining. So Mosby looks at him and he says, "Well, didn't you tell me you came here to learn the art of war?" The German guy goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, that's your first lesson."
Yep.
That's what about losing his suit. So to Mosby's surprise, there were 2 Union paymasters on this train, Major Ruggles and Major Moore.
Mm-hmm.
And on the train, they were carrying a total of $168,000 greenbacks. Called the Greenback Raid.
Yep.
See, that's what I call it, right?
Creative.
So when 3 of Mosby's men opened the satchels, they found all of this cash, and they were stunned. You know what they did? Mosby spread the money out, divided it equally amongst the men, regardless of rank. We're going to split it evenly. They took all the money. What was funny about it, too, is after Ruggles and Moore were exchanged, Moore sent a letter to Mosby asking for a letter back saying that they took the money. Mosby did. Because apparently Moore and Ruggles were getting blamed for stealing the
Oh
cash.
God.
So he's like, can you do me a favor? Can you say you took it? Because they think we did. I'm not sure if you ever wrote the letter or not, but that's a true story. At this point, Sheridan, he's going to write a letter to Henry Halleck about all this.
Yeah.
And he's going to write to him and says, let them know that there is a God in Israel, and Mosby has annoyed me considerably. That's what the quote was.
You know what? I gotta say, I respect Mosby a lot for annoying Sheridan because I cannot stand Phil Sheridan. Anybody that annoys him, hero.
Oh, he absolutely did.
Mosby.
Well, Mosby didn't know it, but his days were coming to an end with the raids, and he didn't realize it. So, December 21st, 1864, he'd gone to the house of a guy named Joseph Blackwell. He was a local farmer, and he's going to attend a wedding of his ordnance sergeant. That's what he's going to do. Now, while he's there, he's going to hear of approaching cavalry, and so he's going to take a guy named Tom Love and ride out to go see what the heck's going on. They get out there and they immediately start getting fired upon.
Yep.
Like, what the hell? So they haul ass to a nearby house who they knew was a Southern sympathizer, part of that network.
Yep.
And they go inside as a family sitting down to dinner. The lights are on. They knock on the door. They get let in. And soon they're eating dinner with the family. Mosby he was going to a wedding. He had a nice dress outfit on, but he had his Confederate jacket with the stars on it.
Yeah.
And so first thing he does, he takes a jacket and hides it. Because if they come in this house, he wears that jacket, then he's screwed.
Yeah.
So eventually what happens, the Union men do come in the house. And while Mosby's being interrogated, from outside, some trooper fires a shot through the window and gets him right in the stomach, gets Mosby. And he thinks it's mortal. The doctor examining the wound is going to determine it's going to be mortal. And the Union troops see him dying and they go, well, nothing we can do with that. We're going to leave him with the family. We're going to walk away. They didn't know it was Mosby. No. They had no idea who it was.
But he'd managed to stumble upstairs and he hid his jacket just in case they went to look for stuff, right?
You know what Mosby told the doctor? He says that he was ironic that he was shot in the same part of the body that Jeb Stuart was shot in. He thought that was a sign. So, but the doctor was able to get the ball out of his body, and Mosby miraculously survived this.
But he takes a long time to recover.
He does. He gets transported to his father's house back in Lynchburg, where he finds out in the newspapers he's been reported dead. Now, it was somewhere around now where the Union guys put one and one together and realized that the guy they shot was Mosby.
Yeah.
And they think they killed him. And you kidding me? They came with their pants on. They're so excited that they killed John Mosby. Right. And so they reveled in it, especially Sheridan. Sheridan was absolutely delighted when he heard the news. But what happens weeks later, they get the bad news of Mosby's death was greatly exaggerated, as they say.
Yeah.
And Lieutenant Colonel Clendenin of the 8th Illinois Cavalry, the elite 8th Illinois, he's going to report, because he goes on reconnaissance to find this out. He says, the rebel accounts show that their conclusions were correct. Mosby is not yet dead. The devil takes care of his own. That's what he said to him.
Wow. Yeah, but Mosby does take a long time to recover from this wound. A long time compared to the rest of the wounds that he had received during the war. You know, even after the coin purse groin injury, he was only a few weeks recovering from that. The one prior to that, again, he was back after a month. But this one, takes him out.
The Greenback raid, he had to fight with one boot on. He had his sock on.
Yeah,
because he got hurt in his foot and he couldn't put his boot on, so he had a sock on. So his body, he was taking hits. Mm-hmm. He does in fact recover though, and his men continue to raid under his name.
Yeah.
March 27th, 1865, Mosby gets a promotion. He gets put in command of all troops in Northern Virginia, which is just a few weeks later is going to be Appomattox and the surrender of Robert Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And they're going to surrender. But what's interesting though, too, is he was in Appomattox. He didn't formally surrender until June 17, 1865, one of the last commanders to surrender.
His guys keep going for a few weeks after the war. And like Mosby just pretty much refuses to surrender, you know.
Well, Mosby's one of these guys that E.P. Alexander is thinking about with the bushwhacking.
The guerrilla style warfare.
This is who he's really thinking of. But June 17th, he does shut it down. He writes a letter to his troops. He writes, "Soldiers, I have summoned you together for the one last time. The visions we have cherished of a free and independent country have vanished, and that country is now the spoil of the conqueror. And at this moment of bidding you a final adieu, accept the reassurance of my unchanging confidence and regards. Farewell. XOXO, John Mosby."
Yep.
That's the letter he's gonna write to his guys. But even after the war, though, the Union continues to be a pain in the ass to him because
Yep.
they don't like him.
No, Stanton
Like,
doesn't. Like, he puts a price on his head and says there is evidence that there is evidence that Mosby knew of Booth's plan. That's Stanton to General Hancock, and he said, you know, he was probably in the city when it happened. And at this point, this is like Stanton playing reaches, extending his grasp to try and figure out what's going on with the Lincoln assassination. There's absolutely no evidence that Mosby was there. Hancock knew that. Hancock knew he was in Virginia at the time of the assassination.
yeah, Stanton didn't offer Mosby that pardon that was given to all of Lee's army. It didn't
Yeah.
include him. He got arrested on trumped up charges until he finally appealed directly to U.S. Grant. And
Yeah, his
Grant
wife and son Reverdy went
Yeah,
to
he got
Grant.
yeah he got a handwritten pardon in January of 1866.
Yeah.
But there was really this plus the kindness that Grant showed Lee at Appomattox really made him respect Grant. This is Mosby.
Yeah.
So Mosby's going to write about Grant. He's going to write, "I had strong personal reasons for being friendly with General Grant. If had not thrown his shield over me, I would have been outlawed and driven into exile," he says.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is Mosby and Grant kind of forged this weird partnership, this friendship,
Well, it's
this
funny
opposites
because
attract type thing.
yeah, because it's funny because May 4th, 1865, Grant writes to Halleck and said, "I would advise offering a $5,000 reward for Mosby." And then 1866, he's saying, let's give him an exemption from arrest, guaranteed safe conduct. And Grant grows to respect and like him too. Like you said, they became good friends. Grant said of Mosby, "Since the close of the war, I have come to know Colonel Mosby personally and somewhat intimately. He's a different man than what I entirely supposed. He is able and thoroughly honest and truthful."
Yeah. Mosby knew Grant would be the guy to help with Reconstruction. He
Yep.
figured if we got really good terms of surrender, maybe he's going to give the South good terms. Lincoln's
Yep.
dead. Johnson's going to be a disaster. He knows. So they had a good little thing going. Mosby's going to ultimately join the Republican Party. He's going to flip. He's going to campaign for U.S. Grant, which suddenly made him, who was once one of the heroes of the South, quickly hated in the South.
He's a scallywag.
Scallywag, right?
Yep.
Mosby had become also very outspoken against Robert E. Lee because what happened was Lee blamed Jeb Stuart for Gettysburg. Actually, it wasn't even Lee. It was Marshall and it was Taylor
Yep.
who started to write letters saying that Jeb Stuart was supposed to maintain contact with the Union Army, the Confederate Army. He never did. And then Mosby's like, wait a second, I have the original order. All this order says is Jeb is supposed to stay to the right of Ewell through the Susquehanna going up that area and get supplies. There was nothing in Lee's order to Jeb about maintaining contact with the Army and reporting on Hooker. Beverly Robertson, you had guys like that to do it. But so that original order that Mosby had says, wait a second, this has nothing to do with it. It was part of that Gettysburg post-war. We can't blame Lee for this. Yeah. And Mosby hated that. It wasn't so much he disliked Lee. He knew that cult of personality, that lost cause thing that was being created was bullshit. And he knew it. And for that reason, the people in the South didn't really like this guy too much. And so, but of Grant, Mosby knew he was the guy. He said, I know it is the disposition of General Grant to do everything in his power for the relief of the Southern people if Southern politicians will let him do it.
Yeah.
So these are the type of comments he was making.
Yeah.
The dude could write, and he was a little swarmy. I'm surprised he's not a Bostonian.
Oh, he sounds like, I found a total Bostonian quote from Mosby where he said, "There was more vindictiveness shown to me by the Virginia people for my voting for Grant than the North showed me for fighting for 4 years against him."
Yep.
He's just got he's like, I'm basically saying to the Southerners, and the people where he's from, Virginia, I'm trying to help you out. Like, we need to move past this. And he's become like Longstreet, a scallywag.
Mosby had his life threatened. He
Yeah.
had his childhood home burned.
Assassination attempt.
Assassination attempt. That letter you mentioned of Ben Chapman, that you mentioned before about the fighting for 4 years against them.
Yeah.
He was feeling it. He clearly was. 1878, Mosby is going to lose his wife Pauline, and he's going to find himself the only parent of 6 children, and he needed a job. So what is he going to do? He's going to use his political connections to get a gig in the U.S. consuls, as U.S. consul to Hong Kong. And from there, he got a number of government type of positions. Now, he was also the assistant attorney general in the Justice Department. He was there from 1904 to 1910. During this time, he wrote a lot of books, had a lot of adventures. One thing that was fun was he ended up meeting Grant again. It was 1879. It was the last time he ever saw him. He took a boat ride with him in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And so he ends up with U.S. Grants, and the governor of Hong Kong was there with them, and they were talking. And General Grant was talking about. He said he was given a description of a ride he took on a donkey from Jaffa to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And he said, and General Grant says that was the roughest road I ever traveled. I don't think I've traveled a tougher road than that. And then Mosby says, he goes, yeah, you have. And Grant goes, where? He goes, from the Rapidan to Richmond, right? And then Grant sits back, probably had a big cigar going. He goes, I reckon there were more obstructions on that road than this one.
Yeah.
but that was the type of conversations they had.
Yeah.
And so he wrote a lot of books. He wrote his memoirs. 1916, Mosby is going to die at the age of 83. He'll be buried next to Pauline in the town of Warrenton, Virginia, which is not far from the Manassas battlefield, not far from Fairfax. But the thing about Mosby, though, is his legend still hangs over Virginia.
Yeah.
And years later, there was that story that he was close with the Patton family.
Yeah.
And it was rumored, and this is, who knows, but it's rumored that a young George Patton, General Patton, the big man there, rode on the family farm with an aging John Mosby, with George playing the role of General Lee. And who knows that, but that's the story. 1992. Okay, 1900. He's inducted into the U.S. Army Rangers Hall of Fame in Fort Benning, Georgia. It's 100 years later. And the thing about it is, whether these stories are true or legend, and most of them are true, and a lot of them are embellished, I'm sure they are. The fact of the matter is, the partisan tactics that are fought by John Singleton Mosby, a guy with no military background, they are still studied at West Point today. And they were used in the recent modern wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So the ghost of John Mosby still cast a large gray shadow throughout the Civil War and beyond in the U.S. military. There's no question.
Yep. Oh, definitely. He's a fascinating study. And the one thing I thought when I was doing the research for this episode is I went into it, like, honestly, be honest, I didn't know too much about John Mosby other than, Gray Ghost and like a couple of his raids and all that, and just his kind of how he was with Jeb Stuart. But I thought, like, wow, this is another guy whose life would make a really cool, like, Netflix series, like 8 episodes or something on John Singleton Mosby. I think that would just, like, it's so fascinating. And it's got enough that it would be comedic. You think about him going in to get Stoughton and spanking him, right? Like, it's a fascinating life he led, and just how he was able to do what he did with his Rangers. Even when they were like, he starts off, there's just 15 of them, and then it grows to be as much as at one point 2,000. On average, it was about 800 once they really got going. But still, it's a fascinating story.
And you're right, though. If he was a hard, disciplined guy, and he would threaten them, you don't do what I want, I'm going to do with you? I'm going to send you back to the army.
Yeah.
No. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be a partisan. So he's a guy. We talked a lot about guys with this, but what's fascinating about him was he was a hard guy. He was not a cruel guy. He didn't burn things. A lot of stuff. He destroyed property, railroads, things like that. But he was a true definition of a cavalier, because he literally robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, with things like medicine. He sent supplies back to the Confederate Army, and he did it with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about him. So he's someone who is he's an A-lister. He's not somebody who's kind of in the background. Everybody knows who John Mosby is. But when you study his background about how he's forged that friendship with Jeb Stuart, got the opportunities, made the best of his opportunities, and became the apple of Jeb's eye.
Yeah.
His career just took off like a rocket to the moon. So John Mosby, he lived until 83 years old. He made it all the way through. They never did catch him. And so at the end, so he was able to live a life. Unfortunately, his life kind of ended up in the South, kind of tainted a little bit because of the scallywag thing with grants, and that's unfortunate. But I think when you look at both sides, he's somebody who any soldier, if you could bring them back today, will tell you that he was a guy they probably feared and respected.
Yeah.
And at the end of the war, he knew the war was over. It was time to reconcile the South.
Yeah.
And he did everything he could to help make that happen too. So he was somebody who definitely is a worthwhile study. For anybody who hasn't studied him, his memoirs are a great read. It's very entertaining. It reads like an adventure novel.
I read some of them to get ready for this episode. It's very fascinating.
And it's definitely a lot of fun. Yeah. So what's coming up for us, Mary? What's next for us?
So our next episode will be dropping on Halloween weekend, and we will be joined for our third Halloween extravaganza from the Boo Barn by Jay Price.
Jen Vincent Price will be back with old Bloody Mary Fincher.
Yep.
Halloween 3, the Spooktacular Part 3. I can't believe we're doing a third episode.
It's a third one.
Halloween fun. We're going to go from talking about a gray ghost to a lot of other ghosts that hopefully won't be too scary. Jen freaked me out last time. So that was not good.
Jen said she's not going to freak you out this time, I think. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing.
I'm sure she will.
If you're listening to this, we hope you joined us for our Facebook Live. We will be announcing our next roundtable soon. We had to move that. It's not going to be next week. It's probably going to be the week after. We got a couple more books for our book club, which we're going to get squared away with that soon. And then, we will be with you with our Halloween episode. But then in November, we'll have probably some battle episodes, and we've got a couple other things planned as well. And stay tuned soon. Very soon, we will be announcing the books for our 2023 book club.
We got a book club coming up here next month.
Yep.
We do. We talk about that. So that's good. So bring candy for the thing next week. I expect candy. Yeah. Bring those for the episode. Any final words from you, Fincheru?
Well, thank you for bringing it for this episode. You did awesome as always. I know Mosby is a guy that you love to study, and I have to say I love studying him too. He's a very fascinating individual. So I'm glad we were able to talk about him tonight.
Yep, absolutely. It's a lot of fun.
Any final words?
Well, everybody, thanks. No, I got nothing to say. As usual, I agree with everybody. So have a great weekend. Have a great end of the week. Some rain's coming this week. Hopefully it stays rain, not snow, as we begin to look a little bit towards Halloween around the corner. Oh, my goodness gracious. All right, that'll do it for us. Everybody, thanks for listening. Mary, again, the pleasure was all yours as usual. And we look forward to you all on the other side.
See y'all later.